So let's get this gig started. We're super excited to have Mauro here today. My name is Karen Copeland. I'm the CEO of Create Exchange. So I'm obsessed with having the next big thing, amazing speakers. And when I found out about Mauro's book, I was like, all of us want to understand what are the up and coming trends, like what do we think is going to happen. So when he agreed to do this, I was really super excited, and I could see by the attendance that everyone here was excited as well. And our mission, of course, at Create Exchange is how do we expose our audience to the world's greatest thought leaders and give us the edge of what the future might hold. And that way we can grow as a business and community leaders by staying ahead of the trends. This is the first time I'm coming to you from my new office space in the Cambridge Innovation Center, CIC, in the Science Center. Woo! So it's really excited. I'm a part of the CIC community, and it's fun to be in a space. And I have to say, and I thank you to Hayworth and Trans America for the amazing furniture. So before I wanted to just to have a few words from Nicole Carville, who is she is architect and design consultant for Hayworth.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Yes, I am coming to you from Hayworth, Philadelphia. As we all know, these last few months have given us a lot of time to think about where work happens, where we're working. I'm joined today with my wonderful dealer partner, Carla Driver from Transamerican in Manayunk. And together we are thinking about working from home, working from anywhere, and everything in between. So looking forward to the program, Karen. Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to make sure, I love to hold things up. I wanted to make sure that you all got the attachment, the future of everything. We sent you an agenda, which is also, I think Neil can put that up in the chat too, but we did send it in your, I think it was a part of your last email. But anyway, it has all of the chapters in the book because there are 8 chapters, and so it gives you a little bit of a preview. And so Neil can put that in the book so you can download that as well. But what I want to talk to you a little before I bring Mauro out, even though he's out, how we're going to do this event. There's so much amazing stuff to cover. So we are going to break it up into 3 parts, like worldwide population trends, emerging markets, the future of technology. So what we will do is during those little, during that time, if you want to ask a question, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. Now, what we like to do, because we like to see everybody and we want everybody to be engaged, is we will call on you to ask that question. So you'll have to be able to, well, again, we'll call on you to ask the question. So I also wanted to introduce you to Sherry Resnick, who is a creative and director, chief engagement officer. We work with each other, and so she'll be helping to facilitate a lot of the questions too. But again, we want us to be as in person as possible. What also I thought was important too, we wanted to lay some ground rules, because take a moment to really reflect on what led you to come to this event today. Was it the content of the event, about Mauro's book? What was your key intention? We'd love for all of you to meditate and think about that. What do you want to learn? Ideally, again, drop that into the chat windows so we can address your intention in a really dynamic way. And again, please put questions in the chat bar, chat room, whatever that thing is, and we'll try to address that all personally. But finally, if we don't get to everyone, Mauro is incredible. He said, fear not. He is happy to continue the conversation via email. So we'll provide all the information to you, so you'll be able to talk to him personally. This is a super juicy, incredibly interesting book. I get the book, which Sherry has right now, and then I listen to the book. I have it going every which way, but it's just so incredible. We could be talking forever. So I know the trends are a little bit scary. Mauro has robots taking care of American grandparents because they outnumber the youth. The blockchain technology that will order our driverless Uber and take us home from the automated airport. On the upside, you have more than 60-plus-year-old female millionaires. Woohoo! And apparently 60 is the new 40. So we're super digging that. 60 is the new 40, everybody. Maybe I'll say that again. So we did divide it into the three sections. Okay, first off is we're going to learn as much about these chats as possible. So let me just get into it. So, okay, Mauro, what led you to write this particular book? There's so many people, of course, right now talking about trends and so many different things being published. What's the unique gap in the market? Why this topic and why now?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for inviting me to your platform. And I'm really happy to be here today. I apologize for the slight delay at the beginning. And look, I've been essentially thinking about what's going to happen in the world for the last 7 years or so. As a professor, of course, I make presentations all the time, not just to my students, but also, frequently companies or organizations invite me to make presentations. And beginning 7 years ago or so, I started to detect like somewhat of an anxiety on the part of my audiences. They knew that things were changing very quickly in the world. Remember, 7 years ago was in the wake of the previous global financial crisis. And I was telling them about the three topics that you anticipated earlier, which is population trends, changes in emerging markets, and changes in technology. And after doing this for 2 or 3 years, I realized I really have to write a book. I have to, try to understand myself, what's going on and where all of this is taking us. And I have to be able to provide people with a roadmap.
Yeah.
So I wanted to essentially address that anxiety, because I actually believe that, as a good optimist, that every difficulty, every threat can be turned into an opportunity. And that's exactly why I wrote the book, because I actually see a lot of opportunities embedded in all of this change.
Yeah.
And I wanted to provide people with a guide to those opportunities.
Well, you know what's interesting is I know that we were not experiencing the worldwide pandemic when you wrote this book. And so what's interesting is how will this moment accelerate or decelerate any of these trends?
Well, the pandemic is, of course, something that nobody could anticipate, at least in terms of its timing. But you see, this pandemic carrying is very different from others that we've seen in history. It's very different from other crises, economic crises as well, in the following sense. This is a pandemic that, for the most part, accelerates pre-existing trends. It intensifies the kinds of things that were going on in the world before the pandemic hit. And so, the title of the book, as you know, is 2030, because I believe that by that year, we will have reached a tipping point along many of these trends. But now my only regret, quite frankly, is that because of the, enormous effects of this pandemic, maybe the title of the book should be 2028, because that future is now arriving earlier, in the sense that if the pandemic exacerbates the trends, if it accelerates the trends, then essentially that future that I think we're all waiting to find out what it looked like, it's arriving faster. And therefore, of course, the urgency in terms of getting prepared for it.
I know, there's so much anxiety. Oh my God. And I love how you talk about, so a lot of us are creative people, and we call it, creative thinking, design thinking, but just explain the differences. A lot of people focus too much on one particular thing, and they don't really don't look as much at the lateral thinking. So explain to all of us what you mean by lateral thinking. And what is that pitfall that people often trip into, and how have you taken a different approach to that?
Yeah, so that I think is one of the most important messages in the book,
Yeah,
which says that if you only consider one trend at a time, you're not really going to understand how the world in its entirety is going to be transformed by this. So as you said earlier, I consider population trends, I consider economic trends, I consider technological trends, and they all come together. Let me just give you a very simple example,
okay.
right? So we see in China, right? As you know, there used to be a one-child policy, and as a result, 20% more boys than girls, right? And that essentially led parents to save more money because they wanted to make their child, their only child, more competitive, especially if it was a boy in the marriage market, so to speak, right? And guess what? China was developing and it needed capital. So those savings were really important to them. But at some point, Chinese families were saving so much that a lot of that money ended up here in the United States because we needed money because we were borrowing a lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? All of that was facilitated by technology and at the same time had the effect of also fostering the development of new technologies as well. So all of these things come together. Lateral thinking is all about connecting the dots. So I don't think in this world that we're going to be in within 5 to 10 years, I don't think the specialists, the people who know a lot about one particular thing, are going to be the ones who succeed. I think it's going to be the people who have the ability to, make all of those connections, right?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
are going to be able to see the lateral, ways in which all of these things come together.
Right. Right. So so let's move to the first trend. Well, which is part of really is gray is the new black. So share with us your population perspective, what we can expect, and what are the implications are.
Yeah, so gray is the new black is all about.
I love that. I love that terminology. I keep walking around obsessing and telling everybody gray is the new black.
Absolutely, because you see, until now, Karen, I think governments, I think companies, I think all sorts of organizations, they have neglected the population above the age of 60 or
They're
above the age
focused on
of
the
70.
millennials for everything. All the businesses.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So not to say that millennials are not important. Of course, they are important. But, we've gotten to a point in which we're approaching a moment that will be peculiar because we're going to have more grandparents in the world than grandchildren.
Yeah.
I'm sure that, Karen, when you and I were growing up, there were a lot of grandchildren around. But now all of the grandparents are still alive because life expectancy has grown.
Mhm.
And of course, the children of those grandparents haven't had a lot of babies. So there's not enough grandchildren for all of these grandparents. But, the implication of this is really important. Number one is the largest segment of the consumer market is going to be the population above age 60. So you see, in the past, the biggest market was always that of young people in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
But that's no longer going to be the case. And second point that I think is extremely important, Karen, is that we need to abandon this idea that people above the age of 60 or 70 are old.
Right.
Because the meaning of old and young is changing. A 70-year-old today is in much better mental and physical shape than a 70-year-old 40 years ago or 50 years ago. So we need to abandon that conception that there are old people and there are young people. There are people. And people in their 60s, in their 70s, they want to have a full life. They want to continue enjoying everything that life offers. They want to have quality of life. And companies, at long last, organizations, governments will have no choice but to pay attention to them. That's why gray is the new black.
Love that. I love that. I love. So, okay, so we have all these new people. So we have people living longer. So what is that challenge? I guess the unique challenges of the impact of learning institutions. Like it's constant learning, which I think is really exciting because people don't necessarily have to fall into age demographics anymore, but that will be a whole different way for people to learn.
Absolutely. And look, when on average, we used to live maybe 60 years or 65, right? Now we live on average maybe 85 or 90 years.
Right.
Then, we decided back then, let's divide up life into 4 different stages. First, we only play. Then we learn when we're in our teens or 20s. Then we work. And then finally we retire. right?
Right.
And so typically you would have maybe 3 or 4 jobs over your work life, right?
Yeah.
But now I think we're moving into a different situation. Now people are living 80 or 90 years. And whatever you learned when you were in your teens or your 20s, maybe it's no longer good because knowledge, technology, everything is changing so fast. So I think that now, instead of actually working 3 or 4 jobs, what we're going to do is go through 2 or 3 careers.
Yeah.
And each time that our present career is no longer what we want to do, we're going to go back to school. We're not only going to be in school when we are 15 or 22 years old, we're going to keep on going back to school. It's going to be a new model. And that's why I always say, Karen, it's extremely important to once and for all to change our mindset. You
Yeah.
see, this idea that life progresses in stages from play to learning to working and then being in retirement, that's a 19th century idea. That's 150 years old.
Yeah.
And at the time, people lived on average 50 years. But now we're living, as I said, 80 years, 85, 90 years, if you're a woman, even longer on average. So we have to change our mindset. Not only us as individuals, but also companies, the government, organizations. We need to be more flexible about what it means to be old and young. And we need to perhaps acquire new knowledge and new skills several times during our lifetimes.
I love all the new products that are going to be designed. There's going to be so many. I'm a former industrial designer. I love the fact that there's a lot of new products that are going to be designed for older people to be able to live a better quality life. So it's pretty exciting, really exciting. So let's go to the third trend. So keeping up with the Singhs and the Wongs. The old middle class, new middle class, how do you view these things and share with us the key stakes at hand when it comes to this?
Yes, so as you know, the middle class is the backbone of the American market.
Yeah.
And also, of course, of American society. And for the longest time, I would say about 80 years, the US has had the largest, the richest, the most innovative middle class in the world.
Right.
But now, of course, countries such as China and India, they're getting bigger and their middle classes are growing richer. And so before we know it, probably by the year 2027 or not, or so, the Chinese middle class will be the largest in the world in terms of their purchasing power. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to be poor. So I think what we need to do here in the United States is, once again, to change our mindset. We can continue to be a very rich country, very innovative. We can have very high standards of living for our middle class, even after we become number 2 in terms of the size of our own market, right? That's really important, right? And let's not forget, there are so many countries in the world that are very small, like Denmark, like Singapore, right? But they are very rich. So we don't have to be the largest in the world in order to be the richest. And because India and China have so many people and they're very successful at growing their economy, they have a bigger middle class. And so instead of keeping up with the Joneses, we're going to have to keep up with the Singhs and the Wangs, so with India and with China. But again, we should see this as an opportunity for us. So instead of complaining about it, what we should be thinking is, oh my goodness, China and India, there's a middle class there. That's going to be a big market. Maybe we should prepare for that. Maybe we should try to sell them more things. Maybe we should try to understand how they think, right? And in so doing, I think we will be able to deliver for many years to come very high standards of living for our own middle class here in the United States.
So do you think the Americans were oblivious to the fact that we're not fully grasping how much bigger that middle class population is going to be relative to the US and Europe combined? And that's a real incredible shift in dynamics.
Yes, well, more than Americans in general, Karen, I think American companies haven't realized that.
Yeah.
In the sense that, again, for the longest time, whenever they would launch a new product or service, they would have the American consumer in mind.
Right.
But now increasingly, they need to have the Chinese and a little bit later, the Indian consumer in mind.
Yeah.
So I think it is mostly a message that I have in the book that is directed at companies, right? And again, that is possible to succeed in that kind of a world in which the American consumer market is not the largest. Again, it can be the richest in the world. We can have a great middle class here,
Yeah.
but it's going to be, of course, impossible to be the largest market because, we have 400 million people in this country, whereas China and India have each 1.3 billion, right? Which is more than three times as many as we do. So I think it's just a matter of flexibility. It's a matter of adapting to the new situation. It's a matter of changing our mindset.
Changing our mindsets. Okay, so this is one of my favorite subjects. So second sex no more is one of the trends, but I always think about, when should we expect to see businesses, broadly speaking, spend more time considering women's wants and needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me just clarify one thing. The title of that chapter is Second Sex No More ?
Oh,
Right?
question mark, right? I forgot the question mark.
That's important. In other words, that I think it is still up for grabs as to whether men and women are going to be co-equal, right? Which I think should be, the goal here. But I'm not denying that there is discrimination. There continues to be discrimination against women in the labor market, in education, in all sorts of ways. And if there is that kind of discrimination in the United States, just imagine in some other parts of the world, there's also discrimination. But having said that, now more women are graduating from college than men. Women are definitely making progress. Not all of them, because there's always inequality, but there is certainly progress being made. And what this means is, two things. I mean, one is that, of course, women are increasingly occupying positions, I would say, of power within companies, within all sorts of organizations, within the government, and so on. And secondly, the women then are getting paid money for their labor, and they are accumulating wealth over time.
Right.
So a couple of important consequences here is, look, at American households right now, where you see a married couple, man and woman, right now, 41% of those households, the woman makes more money than the man. The wife makes more money than the husband. But by the year 2030, the projection by the US Census Bureau is that in more than half of American households, the wife will make more money than the husband. And that is a tipping point, okay?
That's a huge tipping point.
That's a huge tipping point. That's going to change quite a few things.
So
right?
Sherry wanted to ask, Sherry, what do you wanted to interject something?
So, well, I'm going to move with the conversation. I had a question a little bit further back, but I'll come back to it tomorrow. So how will that change the social dynamic? I think there will be consequences to that, right? Because we're a lot a sexist country. You don't need to address that, but I don't know if you can actually address this question without addressing that. How will the social dynamic look like when women are more at the top of the food chain?
Well, that's a great question. And look, I think once again, all of us, both men and women, we're going to have to work very hard at understanding each other's yearnings, each other's aspirations, and also each other's frustrations. So look, it's undeniable that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to feel resentment because they're going to see especially highly educated women surge ahead, right? Do better in life.
Yeah.
Have more money, have more wealth, have a better house, take more vacations and all of that. And that there will be some women who are left behind who resent that. There's going to be a lot of men who resent that. Right. So sexism, of course, is something that we cannot eradicate in just a couple of years. It's something that has been building up for centuries, if not millennia, right? Since we've had sedentary societies dedicated to agriculture, and we've seen, a division of labor between men and women beginning 10,000 years ago. So I think it would be, it wouldn't be realistic for me to say, oh, I think attitudes are going to change. And all of those bad things that we continue to have in our minds, will go away magically. No, they won't. So that's why I think, the only, path forward here is to try to better understand each other. So we need dialogue, we need debate, such as for example, the one that you've organized here today. So I think it's important to discuss these issues. So for example, what's going to happen in the United States when women make more money than men, right? Because quite frankly, when Nixon was president, when Kennedy was president, nobody was predicting that would ever happen, right?
Yeah.
And yet here we are. Those of us who were born when Kennedy was president, as I was, now we're seeing, right, that the world is completely different, right? Back then, there were no women CEOs. There were no women entrepreneurs of major companies. There were no women pretty much in Congress or in the cabinet, the president's cabinet.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to get used to this. And I think it's going to require quite a bit of effort on our part to understand each other.
Yeah, I think it's really important to start having those awkward conversations. I think that's been like a theme for 2020, right? Is how can we get closer to people that aren't like us and be able to listen and understand without having our backs up. So having said that, especially what you just described, what do you think the political landscape will look like? Because I feel like there could really be a backlash. I don't.
I believe, I've been living in this country now for 30 plus years, and I believe there is a backlash against some of these changes. There's no question about it. But let me also point out ways in which I think this new position of women in American society is going to change politics. So as you know, money is very important in politics.
Yeah.
So if women have more wealth, we could expect that increasingly over time, more of these political donations to political candidates will be made by women. And we know from surveys that women care more about healthcare. They care more about education. They care more about the future than the average man. So is this going to translate into more political donations to political candidates who care about education or who care about healthcare? I would say in principle, yes. I think it's going to take a while for that to happen, but I think it's going to happen. And by the way, the same could happen in philanthropy. I mean, philanthropy in the United States is very important, right? Churches, hospitals, universities, schools, soup kitchens, all sorts of organizations depend on philanthropy. Well, if now we're going to have more wealth in the hands of women, is philanthropic giving going to evolve in the United States? I believe it will. We haven't seen that yet. I've been looking at the numbers and there's no major shift yet. But quite frankly, that's what I expect in the next 5 or 10 years, that we're going to see a shift in terms of political donations and therefore of the most important issues in political debates and in presidential campaigns and so on and so forth. And I think there's going to be a shift in philanthropic giving, again, because women on average seem to care more about certain types of causes or certain kinds of issues when compared to men.
I really love that. That's a glass half full scenario, and I appreciate it. And I think I remember one time reading about how I was reading an article on micro loans in Africa and how when money was in the hands of women, it was spent more carefully, let's just say.
Yeah, there's another thing, if I may add, Sherry, which is that whenever women are in positions of political power, there seems to be less corruption.
Right.
Now, let me clarify one thing. That could change if instead of only having 5% of important political positions occupied by women to, let's say, having 60% or 80%, that could change. Because I think when any group, in this case women, are in the minority, they tend to behave in a different way. So we also have to worry about proportions, right? And when you're the token, you behave in a different way. And maybe corruption is something that tends to emerge when the majority gets used to abusing power, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't exclude the possibility that if a majority of political positions, for example, were occupied by women, then they would start behaving like men, meaning the majority abusing that position of power. So it's something to watch, right? It's something to keep an eye on. Yeah, exactly.
So what I think we can do is there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions on this topic. And I think what we want to do is get through the trends. And then I'd like to see a lot of these, we'll call on a lot of these women to ask the questions personally. But I was trying to just, there is so much information, unfortunately, we just wanted to get through a lot of it. And it's hard to do a super deep dive, but that's why we're making it longer to do, to do some questions at the end. But I did want to talk about where we're halfway through 8 trends. So, well, not halfway through. So, and it's amazing to see how much is going to change over the next 10 years. So the next one down, you called cities drown first. Could you tell us about that trend?
Yeah. So look, I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is environmental degradation.
Yeah.
And I think this pandemic, by the way, should, wake us up to the fact that our relationship as human beings with the environment is not the correct one. You see, every pandemic, at the end of the day, has to do with ecology, how we relate to one another in the environment, right? And, Cities Drown First is all about climate change. It's all about how, as you know, in the world right now, cities are growing very quickly. Cities occupy only 1% of the land in the world. They're home to about 55% of the population, but that percentage is growing really quickly. But you know what? Cities account for 80% of the carbon emissions, 80%.
80%.
And so that's because cities are so energy intensive, and because consumers in cities also are more wasteful. We are more wasteful when we are in the city. And I think that's got to change, because otherwise I don't think there's a solution to climate change. And we're already seeing the consequences. We're seeing extreme weather events. We're seeing, more frequent floodings in some parts of the world. And by the way, this is going to affect us here in the United States, especially in Florida, in the Pacific Northwest. It could affect our agricultural system, which is the envy of the world, right? So food security, I think, is at stake here. But look, if you go to Africa, if you go to Southeast Asia, poor people over there, they're going to be devastated by climate change, because most of those big cities are at sea level. And we're already seeing floodings, right? Very frequent floodings over there. So it's something that we need to address. But once again, we need to fix the cities. I think the problem is in the cities. We need to use technology. We need to commit to certain goals. And we need to change our behavior as consumers. We need to become less wasteful.
Less wasteful. I know, because you talk about the environmental impact on our cities, and that's where the solutions need to come. But you also talked about what you call the I can't even say this right, the modernity of survival. And what do you mean by this?
Well, what I mean is that we could change our behavior in relatively small ways.
Yeah.
But if everybody did that, then we can make a lot of progress in terms of, and again, it's not just climate change, it's not only carbon emissions, it's also the use of plastics. As you know, we have a big problem in the world right now with plastic contamination, which is making its way, by the way, into the food supply, because the fish in the oceans are eating the plastic. And therefore, when you eat fish now, sometimes you're actually eating plastic as well, right? Which is not a good thing. So I think it's really important. Now, I want to comment on something that I saw in the chat, because the messages are coming up, which is relevant to this point, which is, this doesn't mean that people should leave the cities, although I think in Europe and the United States, as a result of this pandemic, a lot of people are reconsidering where they live, right? But what I think this means is that we need to make our cities more livable and smarter. We need to avoid this situation in which people in the cities just make such a negative contribution to the environment, right? Our cities have grown in ways that were not planned. This is particularly true, by the way, in Asia and in Africa, not so much here in the United States or in Europe, but still.
Yeah.
And across the board, we need to be less wasteful. Just one example, Karen, which I think speaks for itself. We produce more food than we need in the world, and yet we have hunger. However, here in the United States, according to the US Department of Agriculture, we waste about 31% of the food that reaches our tables, right? We waste 31% of the food. And that's a problem because there are some people starving around the world, but it's also a problem because in order to produce that food, we use energy, we use transportation, we use fertilizers. And agriculture, at the end of the day, is the biggest contributor to carbon emissions. So if we were a little bit more careful, if we didn't, cook too much food, if we didn't waste so much food, we would be able to solve a very large part of the problem that we're facing, right? And by the way, we will also be in a position to feed everybody on the planet.
Right, right. So I want to move on to technology. And the next one up is more cell phones and toilets and the role of technology, the sharing economy. So share with us your observations of this trend over the next 10 years. And I guess also, let me just go in because I love that when you said, imagine no possessions, the John Lennon song, imagine if there were no possessions. What is behind that particular trend, and what's the key action items that we could be taking from that?
So more cell phones and toilets, which is a chapter in the book, is not about the United States. It's mostly about places like India or Sub-Saharan Africa, where, believe it or not, there's altogether 1 billion people who have access to a cell phone, but they don't have a flush toilet at home.
Yeah.
And that is telling me people are prioritizing things in a very different way today than, let's say, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, right? And so what this means is that people are now placing a lot of value on connectivity, on being able to use information, on being able to communicate, on being able to network with one another, right? Yeah. And I would like to make here the connection to the second part of your question, which is the sharing economy. So you quoted from the famous Imagine song by John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And look, if we took the sharing economy more seriously, not just in terms of Uber and Airbnb, but more broadly, and I'll give you an example in a moment, I think we could become better at reducing our wasteful behavior. And we could save the planet, and we could preserve all of the riches of the planet for our children and our grandchildren. That's the point here, right? So the example is going back to food. Since we waste so much food, why don't we share it, right? Now, that should be done at the local level. And you know what? There's already some platforms, some apps on your phone that will help you share your food within the place or the town or the village or the city where you live.
Yeah.
So there are people who are going hungry in, pretty much right now, every American city or town. And at the same time, those who has privilege enough to continue working, to being able to do well during this pandemic, will continue to waste food. So those sharing apps on your phone will help us share food. By the way, the same goes for clothing. The average American consumer buys 60 items of clothing per year. And many of those we only wear once or twice. And by the way, making a nylon t-shirt, that generates a lot of carbon emissions, right?
Right.
So I think we can become better consumers, less wasteful consumers if we use the sharing economy and all of those apps more frequently. So I think technology actually, especially in the form of sharing apps, could save us from some of our worst behaviors, right, as consumers.
Right. I know Ann Meredith is saying, we talked a little bit about that, is the predictions about the future of civil unrest in the US, particularly with the widening gap between the rich and the poor and the reduction in the size of the middle class. Oh.
Yeah, so is Sherry going to ask a question? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it was Ann Meredith. Ann?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
hi,
Ann,
Ann.
you want to ask that question?
Certainly. Hi, great program. Thanks so much for the great program. In light of your forecasting of the widening gap between the rich and the poor and the rise of civil unrest that we've seen over the past number of years, what is your prediction about that in the future?
Oh,
that's a great question, Anne. That's a fantastic question. And
Thank
look,
you, Ann.
as you know, the pandemic only makes it worse. So we have seen the pandemic essentially accelerating also the trend towards bigger wealth and income inequalities in the United States and in many other countries as well. But this is a pre-existing trend. This is something that has been going on now for 20 years. And by the way, the biggest impact has been technology, in the sense that some of us benefit from technology, but other people don't. They lose their jobs or they don't know how to use it as effectively. Part of it is also free trade. Part of it is, that maybe the government is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. I think the solution to this can only be one, which is that we need to have a serious national conversation about how much more inequality we can have in the United States. We're already at some of the levels that we were reaching back in the 1920s, right? A long time ago. And I don't think this is sustainable. That's why in the book, I suggest that there are two things, two kinds of initiatives that I'm not saying we should be adopting. All I'm saying we should be debating. We should be having a national conversation about them. So one of them is a guaranteed minimum income. If we're seeing that people are being displaced, especially people in their 40s, in their 50s, they cannot easily find another line of work because artificial intelligence or because robotics has essentially, destroyed those jobs that they used to have. We need to think seriously about providing them with what they need. So I'm not saying a universal basic income because I don't like the universal part in it. I think it should only go to people who need it. But I think that a guaranteed minimum income is an idea that we should be debating. I'm not saying we should be adopting necessarily, but we should be debating. And the other one is, given that robotics is taking over our lives, and in manufacturing, as you know, it has already destroyed a lot of jobs. It's already beginning to have the same effect in the service sector. I think we should also consider taxing the robots. So, Anne, I'm sure you pay taxes. I'm sure Karin pays taxes. I pay taxes. I think we should also make the robots pay taxes. And with the money that we will collect, we can help those people displaced by technology. We can help retrain them. So the same way that we tax gasoline because we need to make road repairs and we need to build new roads and bridges, we should also, I think, tax the robots. But quite frankly, right now, nothing of that is happening. So we have this big mismatch here. A lot of us benefit from technological change. I'm the first to admit that I'm more productive thanks to all of these technologies, including the one that we're using right now for this event. But a lot of people feel left behind in this wave of technological change and with free trade and with the global economy and all of that. I benefit, but I recognize a lot of people lose. We need to take care of them. I don't think it is healthy for American society or for the American economy to have so many people who are feeling left behind. I think we need to address that. And it's been, I think, the big mistake that we've made over the last 20 years or so.
Mauro, I think on that account, we have a question from the audience that sort of fits into what you were saying. Mary Schenkel, do you want to jump on and talk about catering to the Indian and Chinese? Because if we don't have if we're not manufacturing things here, how do we cater to that?
Yeah, thank
Mary
you.
around? Oh, okay, great.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. Great program. I'm really enjoying this. And being an entrepreneur myself with a product-based business, I am very obviously, interested and concerned about consumer behavior and certainly future consumer behavior. Knowing that much, and especially having seen this in the pandemic, where so much of the supply chain was affected by China, here in the US, how do you see this large, middle class in China and India, playing out as a benefit for the United States if we're not actually manufacturing anything here, but just potentially offering services? What do you see happening?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mary. And I'm glad that you are an entrepreneur because obviously we need more people like yourself. I wish I had become an entrepreneur, but I decided to be a professor and I found it fascinating. But my dream has always been to be either an architect, to build things, or to be an entrepreneur. But let me answer your question. I think the mistake that we could be making here in the United States is to say, oh, so China and India are growing. What we should do is just focus on our own market. And we should, turn inwards. And why is that a mistake? Well, that's a mistake because the American economy is a mature economy. We're already a rich country, so we may be growing in a good year at 3 or 4% in terms of our gross domestic product, the economy. Whereas in China and India, they're an emerging market. So during a good year, they may grow at 8%, 9%, 10%. So the future is over there in the sense that they have the highest growth rate. And instead of turning inwards, we should try to, play over there. Now, to your point about manufacturing. So I want to say something that may come as a surprise to some people, which is that it is true that American manufacturing has declined, but it has declined in terms of the number of jobs in manufacturing. In fact, we have probably about 40% fewer people working in manufacturing today than we did 20 years ago in the year 2000. But during the same time period, the value of what American manufacturing companies have produced here in the United States has doubled. So in other words, productivity has increased through primarily changes in technology and automation. So with fewer manufacturing workers, now we produce more. I think the name of the game, Mary, is let's make electric vehicles like Tesla does here in the United States. Let's make robotics for the home. As you know, there is this company, iRobot, that has a vacuum cleaner that just cleans your house automatically. It is being made here in the United States. Let's make pharmaceuticals. Let's make highly sophisticated medical equipment, like MRI machines, right, for medical imaging. Let's focus on manufactured goods that we can make here because they're knowledge intensive, because they require highly skilled and therefore high wage labor. Yes, there are certain kinds of things that we will no longer be able to make here because there are other countries in the world that have become more competitive. But I think that if we specialize in those kinds of things that we can make with highly skilled American labor, that we can make with our great science and technology and all of that, then I think we will win. Now, having said that, yes, there will be people here in the United States who have dropped out of high school and who don't have those skills, and who in the past could work for a good wage at a manufacturing plant, but now they have to work at some retailer. I'm not going to name a name, right? And but they're getting only 20% of the pay that they used to get in their manufacturing job. So that's where we also need to pay attention to. We need to help those people, maybe get another education, maybe help them get another kind of job. And if that's not possible, we may need to help them with a guaranteed minimum income. But what I'm trying to say, Mary, and in response to your question, is I think the strength of the American economy is entrepreneurship. It's people who take the initiative. It's technology. It's knowledge. And we cannot turn our backs on that, right? So I actually see a bright future for American manufacturing as long as we continue to innovate. And for me, for example, electric vehicles is right now one of the most exciting areas, because you see, we used to have a declining manufacturing industry, automobile manufacturing industry, but now we have the best company in the world, Tesla, when it comes to electric vehicles. It's by far the best in the world. I mean, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Chinese, the South Koreans, nobody has been able to produce something like Tesla. And it's creating, as you know, thousands of jobs. So I think that's the way of the future. The way of the future is not to try to go back to where we were 30 years ago. The way of the future, I think, is to innovate and to look for the other things, while at the same time, and I do want to emphasize this, is making sure that we're not leaving any Americans behind, because that, I think, has been the mistake of the last 20 years. And that's why I think there's so much frustration and so much resentment at the people who do well in this country, right? And that's why we have, more inequality. And it's something that I think we need to correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. That was a question. As an entrepreneur myself, I was really interested in the new opportunities.
We have another question here from Caroline Richmond. Caroline, do you want to jump on? I think it's such an interesting question about preparing young people. Is Caroline around?
Caroline. Oh,
she will. I just admitted her again. I think she might have.
Yes, I had
Oh,
to.
here's
I'm
Caroline.
sorry, but I'm here. Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Go
you
ahead.
want me to?
Go ahead.
Ask your
I didn't
question.
know what question you wanted me to ask.
Yeah, you had asked a question about that. Are you a teacher?
No, I run an education nonprofit organization, and I'm so grateful to to have a chance to ask the question. The company is called Micro Society, and our kids build their own societies inside their classrooms around the world. So for a period of day, they run their own businesses, stock exchanges, research labs, etc., and they really contend with these issues, especially at the in the older age group. So I was wondering how we might sort of facilitate these kinds, grappling with these issues at a younger age.
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, I think you should also launch another organization to go through those kinds of thought experiments, but for adults. Because once again, I think it will be a terrific way of helping all of us change our mindset, right? And consider other possibilities and other. So look, I think, Caroline, you're doing something that is extremely important, right? So if any country in the world is going to have a future, it needs to educate its young population, right? And of course, no country in the world does a perfect job. We're always leaving children behind. We're always leaving entire communities behind that don't have access to good quality primary and secondary education. So I don't know enough about what you do with the children there, but let me just tell you two things that captured my imagination the moment that you told us a few seconds ago as to what you do on a daily basis. So the first thing is that, look, children are above everything else, a fountain of imagination and of ideas, right? And what we need to avoid, and I say this as an educator, is that education kind of prevents children from being creative, right? So let me quote from Pablo Picasso, as you know, one of the most important artists of the 20th century. He once said that the reason why the artist can be successful is because he or she continues to behave as a child, right? So he was saying an artist cannot be successful, I'm paraphrasing, unless he or she continues to be a child, right?
I'm very familiar with that phrase, yes.
Yeah. So it's extremely important, right? So
Yes.
whatever you do, and it seems to me that the kinds of activities that you organize for these children enable them to, instead of thinking according to the things that we teach them, like history, math, all of these things, it enables them to develop their creativity, right? And I think that's something that if you can come up with a way of helping adults like myself, right, continue behaving like children for the rest of our lives, in the sense of not being inhibited by, oh, what are other people going to say? I have this crazy idea about something that I need to do, so that we are more creative, more productive at what we do. I think that would be a great service, right? Because oftentimes, I'm telling you, conventional education tends to, put us in little boxes as opposed to help us become better at what we do, right?
Yeah.
Yes, if it would be possible to talk with you about this further, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, send me an email. I'm going to put it in the chat right now so that you all have it.
Oh, thanks, Mauro.
But yeah, send me an email. I need to put here everyone. And we can chat more about that. But it's fascinating, Caroline, what you're doing. And I hope that you can also include people like myself in those efforts, and not just children.
Well, I would love that. We have a saying that if you want children to be prepared to run the world, you need to give them a world to run.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so yes, and it gets in very complex layers. So yes, I would love to explore this further with you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So that's awesome. Thank you. So Mauro, we're going to get to your last trend, and then we'll open it up for questions. So
okay.
Your last trend is more currencies than countries. So, all right. So share with us what's at stake here and what we can do about it.
Yeah. So look, I think we've all been born in a world in which each country has a president or a king or somebody who is the visible leader, and each country has a flag. And the other distinctive feature of countries is that each country has a currency. So we have the US dollar here, and so on and so forth. And I think that world is coming to an end. And it's coming to an end, not because I believe that Bitcoin is going to take over the world, It's coming to an end because I think we've been thinking about money and about transactions and about all of these things that we do. For example, we get a marriage certificate, or we pay our taxes every year. We have to submit a tax return and those sorts of things. We've been doing all of these transactions as if they were isolated. I think that we're going to see a proliferation of monies in the world, or currencies, not because Bitcoin will triumph, because you see, governments or central banks, such as the Federal Reserve, will never allow that to happen because they're fearful that they will lose control over money. I think the future lies in what I call digital tokens. So digital tokens that we can exchange, digital tokens that will include money, they will include currency, but more importantly, they will include so many other things. They will include discount coupons. They will include incentives for us to do the right thing, for example, when it comes to the environment. It will include certain types of documents that certify that we've done something. It will include so many other things, like perhaps that will enable us to vote, right, and avoid all of these problems that we seem to be having with who can vote, who hasn't voted, and so on and so forth. So digital tokens, I think, are the future, and that's what I describe in that chapter of the book, which I, of course, gave the title of More Currencies That Country in order to be thought-provoking. But what I really mean to say is that digital tokens are taking over our lives. And as part of those digital tokens, I think we're going to see money embedded into them. And we're going to be paying for things or receiving payment for example, our labor, our work through those digital tokens in the future.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do now is open up to the questions, and Sherry and I will be helping to do that. We're going to go to about 6:10, 6:10, because we have VIP until 6:30, from about 6:10, 6:15 to 6:30 with Mauro. But again, he wants to continue having conversations. So let's just go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, so first, Mauro, do you have any stock tips? No, I'm just kidding.
I do.
You and I will talk after this, okay?
And I can give the advice for free. But...
Okay, I like that kind of advice. Robert Vosberg has, I think, a great question about AI. Robert, can you jump on?
Sure, thank you. Do you see artificial intelligence impacting the information economy's white-collar jobs in the same way that automation has impacted the manufacturing economy's blue-collar jobs? And if so, to what effect? And I'll just contextualize this by saying I'm a transactional lawyer, a trust and estate attorney, and with advances in artificial intelligence and natural language selection, it's just a matter of time before you can get online and have your own will drafted in a matter of seconds. And it's going to put a lot of attorneys out of work.
Yes, Robert. So I think the short answer, I'll give you also a longer answer. The short answer is yes, right? In the sense that there will always be people out there who would see that they can get through a computer a version of the will for a much lower price. And they would be willing then to say, well, instead of going to a lawyer, I'm just going to use that. I don't think it's going to be as good as something that a true lawyer, human being, can provide, but there will be a market for that. So I think the response on the part of lawyers should be to see in which ways they can incorporate those AI tools into what they do to offer a service that is better, something that people would be willing to pay a little bit more than just what the machine can accomplish. So the longer form of my answer is the following. I think the mistake is to think about AI or think about automation more broadly as a substitute for human beings and for the human brain. And, whenever I talk to experts on AI, they always tell me the same thing. Look, there are certain kinds of tasks that are very routine, both physical and cognitive tasks that will be eventually replaced by machines. There's no question about it. But that our response to that, so in my case as a professor, because I am also in danger of being replaced by a computer, right? Let's say for an introductory class that I teach, perhaps a computer in a couple of years from now will be able to do a better job than I do, because I keep on forgetting things and my students are always asking for clarification. Maybe the computer could do a better job, or for a lawyer like yourself. So I think our mistake would be to think about AI as something that can replace us. Let's think about how we can incorporate AI tools to become better at what we do, so for me to become a better professor, for you to become a better lawyer. And so I'm afraid we're going to have to learn about how, not about how to invent AI and all of those algorithms and all of those applications and so on and so forth, but rather to become better at using them in what we do. And I think it's extremely important for us to do that, because I don't think AI, at least in our lifetimes, Robert, I'm assuming you are maybe about my age or maybe a little bit younger. I don't think in our lifetimes, AI will get to the point that we'll be able to replace every human being on the planet. So that gives us an opportunity as human beings to learn how to incorporate AI into the way in which we work, to the benefit of our customers. So in my case, my students, in your case, your customers seeking legal help. I think that's the only way to go, because otherwise you're correct. I mean, there's always going to be people out there who are going to say, oh, I can save a lot of money if instead of just going to a lawyer to get my will done, I just download from a website, I enter a little bit of information, and then the computer, using some fancy AI tools, just makes adjustments so that it's good for me. So that, I think, is the only way forward for people like you and I. I mean, we need to learn about how to use these technologies and incorporate them in what we do. I'm not sure whether I answered all of the aspects of your questions, but that's my take on it. Let me know if I didn't.
Thank you.
That's great, Car. Okay, so Robert Hackman, I think, on that topic, Robert has a great question. You want to jump on there, Robert, about predicting public school education? Robert Hackman?
Yeah, I actually wasn't talking about public education. I was actually talking about educating the public.
Ah, okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I read that.
And the fact that, so what's your prediction about how we can educate the public so that we can at least agree on a set of facts and then debate those facts, and instead of everybody having the ability to operate in their own echo chamber, whether it's regardless of how detached from reality it really is.
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. And it's a question that I don't address directly in my book, but I think that if you read in between the lines, you will probably, I will hope, come up with what I'm about to say, which is, look, given that we have forgotten about these problems, especially inequality, the fact that a lot of people fell behind and they are frustrated and they think the system is not working for them. As a result of that, what we're seeing is polarization, right? And so people have very different ideas, and it's very difficult to persuade them to change their mind about certain issues. I'm not talking only about political issues, also economic issues and social issues. And the problem is, as you said, the echo chamber. That is to say that increasingly when we are polarized, then we only go to media, or we only read newspapers, or we only watch TV that is already consistent with our views, right? That's another side product of polarization. And I think we need to break that cycle. And how can we do that? Well, for example, through events such as this one. So Karen and Sherry, I think this is, again, creating forums for debate of very thorny issues. So the point here is not that we all agree. The point here is that we have a platform on which we can contrast our points of view. And maybe I can persuade some of you to think like me, or maybe some of you can persuade me to think like you on a certain issue. So I think we need to overcome this polarization, because this polarization can completely destroy the fabric of society, I think. And again, I mean, right now, my sense is that the dynamic here in the United States, but also in so many other countries around the world, is such that once people reach a conclusion about, once people make up their minds about an issue, for example, technology or free trade or China or you name it, then it's very difficult to persuade them otherwise. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy for a democratic society. I don't think that's healthy for the economy. Because again, with so many things changing in the world, how is it possible that people have such fixed views about everything, right? When so many things are changing, when technology, when knowledge, when everything seems to be in flux, how come that 50% think this way and 50% think the other way? And that's, fixed in time, right? So I think it's going to be, in the end, really bad in terms of our ability to be flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. So I think, Robert, you've put your finger on something extremely important. We need to make an effort. And again, I think as an educator, I'm trying to do my best in that respect. So I don't want to impose my point of view. I'm trying to help people be more flexible with their views. And I think what Karen and Sherry are doing here is pretty much about the same, which is to provide a forum for the discussion of big topics of our time. And I think that's invaluable. That's the only way I can think we can overcome this problem.
And actually, Robert, since you're still on, and by the way, like, I just love this conversation about how we can be better communicators with each other. I know Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, talks about the only way to get to know each other is proximity. And that, we all could make an effort to get a little closer and go out of our comfort zone to speak to people that we don't know or who are different from us, and try to listen. Very, very hard, but possible. And actually, Robert this is on a totally different subject, but Robert, you had an earlier question that I kind of called out because I'm interested in it myself. It's about the, and I want to make sure I'm getting this right, the availability of portable water. Do you want to?
Yeah, I just, there was, the available of potable water as we continue to get, our population increases and the weather and so forth changes dramatically. One of the major things that holds women back, for instance, is that, they're in charge of getting water for the family for the day. It's insane. And that's a huge issue for farming, for economics, for the education of women and things like that. I don't see it getting better in the short term, right? What do you have any thoughts about that, or do you address issues like that? There's so many. I don't know how.
Yeah. No, look, in the book, actually, there's a few pages on the problem of water scarcity in the world, and how, by the way, with the growth of cities, with climate change, this is going to become more of a problem. And you're absolutely correct, Robert. In some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, women spend up to 4 hours per day securing enough water to clean, to cook, and perform other household tasks, right? And by the way, going back to entrepreneurs. So there are entrepreneurs who have been thinking about the problem. So in the absence of running water in the homes, how do you make sure that these households have enough water and that women don't have to spend 4 hours a day just securing the water? And one entrepreneur, American woman, came up with the idea of creating, it's essentially a big ball that you can fill with water. And then the ball has some mechanism that you can roll it, right? Along the path or the pavement. And in so doing, then you don't have to carry the water, which of course is very heavy. And then they can cut down that time that they spend securing water from an average of 4 hours down to less than an hour a day. So I believe entrepreneurship has a role to play in all of this as well. Look, it's going to become a real problem, right? I know a lot of, talking about stocks, Sherry, I know a lot of people these days, investors, who are putting money into water. Companies that work on water purification technologies, efficient irrigation for agriculture, those sorts of things. Because I think water in the 21st century is going to be what oil was in the 20th century, right? Water is going to become increasingly scarce. As you know, Benjamin Franklin said that we don't learn about the worth of water until the well is dry. And that's exactly the kind of situation we're getting into, that water is going to become more scarce. We need to, innovate. We need to have entrepreneurial initiatives that help us overcome those issues. And I think it's going to be something that is also going to affect us here in the United States. The frequency of droughts, the frequency of floods is becoming more higher, right, as part of climate change. So we're going to have to deal with that, even here in the United States, where we have plenty of water in most places.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's 6:12 now, and thank you, Mauro, for staying on for this part of it.
Sure.
We're gonna have to break. We're ending this part of the event. You're welcome to stay on the Zoom and continue to talk with each other till 6:30. This won't end. We just have to move into another room, but you're welcome to stay on again and connect with each other. And thank you so much. Tomorrow, please buy his book. Please buy his book. And so we'll be following up. We're going to send you we'll send you where to purchase the book. We're going to send the video and some screenshots. And also Mauro did give his email address, and I'll make sure, because there's so many incredible questions. And so thank you so much, and stay connected with us. We're working on all of our events for 2021, and thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.